I saw this game for the first time maybe 10 years ago or more, and I was just beginning to study endgames. And this game really impressed me because in a pretty typical opening, in the Spanish opening, White sacrificed the pawn for the initiative, and Black's position fell apart very, very quickly. So even in the endgame, such factors as the active placement of pieces and extra space can be way, way more important than the material. This is pretty much the main line of the Spanish opening. And here White has a choice to play takes on d4 or knight c6 first, and of course there are some other lines as well. Here the main line instead of bishop b7 is knight to c6. Black tries to put immediate pressure on the center with the bishop and maybe even play something like d5. But White immediately shuts down the center, neutralizing Black's idea at the same time. Now both the Black bishop on b7 and the knight on a5 are somewhat constrained, and it will take them a little bit of time to move to better squares. And time is important in this position because the c-file has opened up, and it's the fight for this open file that's going to decide the game, probably. The first impression is that Black takes over the c-file because he's already doubled on it. But in reality, his pieces are awkwardly placed, and later on it will be inconvenient for him to fight for it. Here, Black's best try is probably to play f5 immediately and try to attack the white center. This would also allow him to possibly utilize the bishop on b7 in case White takes on f5. Instead, Black played a more simple move and soon ended up in trouble. The white knight is coming to f5, and the problem with Black's position is that the bishop is on b7 and not on d7. That definitely makes it more difficult to fight with the knight that's coming to f5. This is probably a decisive mistake because after the exchange of queens, Black's even though Black seems to be controlling the c-file, once White takes over the file, it will be difficult for Black to cover up all the squares in that file, in particular the c7 square. This is a very important move. White prevents the Black knight from getting into the game via the c4 square, and at the moment the Black knight has no other squares. Again, White constrains the Black knight and doesn't let him evacuate to the king's side via the d8 square. This is probably the decisive move in the game because the white pieces are going to take over the c-file, and even though Black wins the e4 pawn, it does not compensate the positional disadvantages at all. Now it would be very tempting to play rook ac1, but in that case Black would probably try to give back some of the material and play knight to c5, and even though White will be able to win the pawn back, that's not enough at all, so he restricts the knight even further. Now rook ac1 is going to be a really decisive threat. It would be now tempting to win the piece with rook a to c1, but in that case Black would take on h3 with the bishop, on d5 with the rook, and would get at least 3 pawns for the piece, as White is going to get the knight on b7. But instead White just activates his pieces and doesn't really hurry with winning a piece. Now this shows white's idea. If now the bishop, which is attacked on c8, if it now takes the pawn on h3, then after knight f4, white's winning quite easily. So that's why black has to make a more passive move, and white just is going to win the piece without allowing any counterplay. So white's going to win the knight on b7, and black gets pretty much no counterplay at all. White's also going to double up rooks on the 7th rank, and there's just nothing for black to hope for, so here's Ein. It's a very impressive game. Because white was really fighting well for the c-file, but also it's very instructive to see how he was constraining the black knight throughout the whole game, and it's that knight that eventually got lost. It's that one piece that stood badly throughout the whole game, and that's the factor that made black's entire position so bad throughout the game.